A&M is going to visit Rocky Top, and LSU tries to build on that impressive comeback victory over Missouri. Welcome into Up to the Second College Football. I am David Nuño. This is Season 3, Episode 7, and it's brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. They want you to enter for your chance to win a $10,000 Academy gift card, plus SEC championship tickets just by signing into the Academy app. The ultimate SEC football sweepstakes runs from October the 8th through November the 18th. No purchase necessary in that one. Odds depend on entries received, ending again on November the 18th. You can find the complete rules at academy.com/official-rules. All right, so on the show today, Billy and Caroline are going to look at the parity in the SEC. A lot of things are happening, and I'm going to talk to ESPN's Laura Rutledge next here on Up to the Second.
Need a new grill? Academy Sports and Outdoors is the destination for your outdoor cooking needs. With our free in-store assembly and pre-assembled grills and smokers, buy online at academy.com and pick up in-store. So keep those grilling plans at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
Our next guest does it all at ESPN, NFL, SEC, college football, you name it. She's all over the place, and she'll be in Knoxville this weekend as A&M and Tennessee square off. Laura Rutledge joining the program. Laura, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So I told you I wanted to talk initially about this Wembley Stadium experience for you. I got to go a few years back. It was amazing. How was that experience for you, watching the NFL abroad there with a bunch of Brits who are starting to slowly get into the game?
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those bucket list pinch me moments for sure. And having done a game there last year as well, I sort of knew what to expect this time, to the point that I feel like I could enjoy it a little bit more and appreciate it. And I mean, it's just so cool when you walk up to iconic Wembley and you see the stadium and you see just every single NFL team represented, some college teams represented. I actually was down on the field and looked up and saw a Florida Gators shirt on a woman. And I was like, okay, that, I didn't expect to see that either. But it's just really fun. There's this buzz throughout the entire game when you're in Wembley. And I think it never gets quiet. It's always kind of loud, and there's just like constant noise, and it feels different. It feels special. And I'm just truly thankful to be able to go out there and have that experience. London is becoming one of my favorite cities for sure.
How hard is it for you to prep for both? I know people do it, but it's difficult to know the SEC in and out and also the NFL during the same time in the same week with a broadcast on Friday and Saturday. And, I'm sure it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, my brain is scrambled eggs, I think, most of the time. I'm like, okay, wait, we got to compartmentalize and keep some things over there and some things over here. But I think one of the things that helps me is you can, doing the NFL every day, I can sort of know things kind of throughout the week. I'm always covering it. I'm doing that show daily with NFL Live. So I think there's more of like a working knowledge there all the time. And then it allows me to find like little pockets of time, usually when I'm at work, when I'm not at home, with the chaos at home. So when I'm at work, I'll try to start working on SEC Nation throughout the week. And, it's a matter of trying to like make every moment count. And there's not a lot of downtime. I'm always like, it's funny. My mom always says like, I only have time for every single thing in the day. Like there can't be an extra thing that's added or there's just no time for it. But I always remind myself too, in the craziness, that, this is beyond my wildest dreams of what I ever thought I would be doing. So I am very thankful, and that helps sometimes with some of the prep.
Laura, let's talk about A&M. They lost a heartbreaker to Alabama, game that they were leading. They have to go to Neyland Stadium now and take on a Tennessee team that's been waiting. I feel like this game for both programs is a fork in the road moment. So talk to us how big it is for both of them, considering what's ahead in the SEC.
Yeah, I think you said that really well. This is sort of the game now with what's happened for both these teams, but maybe even more for A&M, where you sort of figure out, okay, what's the rest of the season going to be? I mean, I still think the SEC West is potentially going to end up being this like cannibalistic situation, and you never know what can happen, right? And A&M's chances certainly to make the postseason and potentially go to the playoff, those may be diminished, right? But I do think that they can still contend and they can still finish the season strong. They're still such a talented team. You saw that on display. I mean, that's why it's got to be so incredibly frustrating for Aggies fans, because we saw it against Alabama. It felt like a winnable game for them in so many ways. Alabama Alabama made a ton of mistakes and yet, still not able to get it done. I mean, the fact that they're doing this too with essentially a backup quarterback who's looked really good, in my opinion, overall, is really impressive. So I do think going on the road adds a unique element. It is so loud in Neyland. You guys know that. I mean, it's just one of the craziest environments. But I think A&M's the better team, and that's where I think we're going to really find out, what they're made of. I mean, that now is time to buckle down here and get something going. And Josh Heupel teams, even though they're not what they were last year, certainly Tennessee, but they're well coached and they're going to be ready for this one, like you said.
Laura, is it fair to say A&M, as good as they are talented-wise, or maybe still a mystery team because of their secondary?
I think so. That's obviously the glaring hole. And the D-line has been so good. I mean, there are so many positives. A lot of times, you can sort of mask a secondary issue if your front seven is pretty good, and they are, right? But I do think, unfortunately, there is a recipe for how to beat them, right? And if you can execute that, which Tennessee can, not like they could have last year, and I don't mean to keep referencing that, but I do think it's important for fans to remember, like, last year was a totally different year for Tennessee. They are not, that team for sure. So they're going to try some things, I think. And look, I mean, if you know that, which A&M does, they're going to try to take shots, whatever you can do to disrupt the quarterback, they need to do. I mean, Milton is not the most accurate quarterback, as we know. So I do think there are some ways to affect him. And that, to me, is going to be the recipe for success for A&M if they're going to win this one on the road.
Am I living in the moment, or does it feel like, yep, Bama figured it out? Here we thought that they're going to have an off year. Their defense is amazing, and Jalen Milroe's freaking Joe Montana out there throwing darts to everybody. They figured it out, right? Or is it just a one-time thing?
I don't know. I mean, I just hate it for A&M fans because it's like, golly, of course, we couldn't get Alabama when Texas got them, right? But anyway, they have figured some things out for sure, right? And I think you're right. The defense has looked a lot better, and you kind of see why Nick Saban wanted Milroe to be the quarterback from the get-go and wanted to get the most out of him because that athleticism was on display. There was the one play where he scrambled and ran for chunky yards, and I thought, okay, that's what it is right there. And we know he's got that in his game, but you didn't feel like he was comfortable enough in what he was doing in the offense to really feel like he could go and do that and create. And certainly they'll have design quarterback runs throughout the rest of the season, but I think the ability to, when a play breaks down, to have that electric ability to run makes such a difference, as we all know. So I think they figured some things out. I still think Georgia's the best team in the SEC and potentially the best team in the country because they also look like they figured some things out against Kentucky. It was almost like poor Kentucky because they're a good team, but it was not conducive to get Georgia after they had barely escaped Auburn and, wanted to come out there and make some sort of big old statement at home. And that's exactly what they did. So I think Alabama, though, is knocking on the door of potentially breaking out. But again, to reference the SEC West, like I did before, A&M's still a really strong contender in the West. You've got LSU that you got to think about, which they've disappointed, but they're still a really good team. So I think it's interesting. None of these teams in the top of the West make me think, oh, they're just going to have an off day and look terrible. I think they're all contenders and they're all teams that nobody wants to face.
You mentioned one right there in LSU, and they had that fork in the road moment last week against Missouri, but it feels to me that Jaden Daniels has to play Heisman-esque for them to continue to win. Am I right?
You're right. And I hate it for them because I do think they have a national championship level offense, but their defense just leaves so much to be desired. And, to be basically last week, I mean, they've played at least 3 different defensive schemes throughout this year. They just cannot figure it out, and they're still trying. And they did some things against Missouri, but, Missouri's good, but that was a back and forth battle on the road that, LSU was lucky to escape with a win there too. So I think they're going to look back on this season and unfortunately feel like they wasted an offense and wasted some of the talent that Jaden Daniels has, but yet still, again, they're scary because even defensively, the schematically hasn't been great, but they have some talent there. It's just, it's odd because, all the DBU stuff, their secondary is a problem too, in a big way.
All right, let's close out with Arkansas because I really like Sam Pittman, and they're staring 5 losses straight in the face this weekend against Alabama. So Does he have enough grace there, you think, to survive this stretch?
I think so, and I hope so. I'm with you. I think Coach Pittman's one of the greatest, and I think it's tough because a lot of people are like looking at this year and they say, well, KJ Jefferson's back. You got Rocket Sanders as the running back. The defense is, palatable, at least a little bit better than last year. Their secondary is a problem too. That seems to be a theme with some of these teams that are losing. It makes sense. But and I hate to make excuses for Arkansas and for Pittman, but every year they have the most difficult schedule. I mean, it's just like death taxes in Arkansas's schedule is going to be terrible. So I don't know if Arkansas fans are willing to continue to give him that pass. I mean, it's a very proud program, a proud fan base, as we know. But yeah, they have not at all lived up to the billing. I think one of the problems in going into the season, we wondered about this. They didn't really have any, other than Rocket Sanders, any proven weapons at the wide receiver position that you felt like, oh, okay, we could really rely on this person. They didn't have a lot of that. And also I think, the defense again has given them trouble, but I hope they'll continue to give him, they love him there. But they're also a fan base that thinks they should be winning a lot more than they are. So that one's a tough one.
Laura, we love your work. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's do it again.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks so much. Hopefully we'll see you in Knoxville.
At Academy Sports and Outdoors, bikes for the whole family are just a click away. Buy online at academy.com with our free in-store assembly. Your next set of wheels, plus helmets, pads, and water bottles will be waiting for you at our in-store pickup counter. Get to the fun faster with our in-store pickup and free assembly at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, enjoy that conversation there with Laura Rutledge. Up next, Billy Liucci and Caroline Fenton give it a spin around the SEC.
Welcome into Up to the Second, brought to you by our friends over at Academy. He is Billy Liucci. I am Caroline Fenton, and we always started off with our teams, Billy's Aggies, my LSU Tigers. But Texas A&M plays the biggest game in the conference for the second week in a row this upcoming week, traveling to Knoxville, taking on the Tennessee Volunteers. So I think we have to start there. But before I want to look ahead, let's look back. It was a tough loss for the Aggies over the weekend against Alabama.
Tough loss for the Aggies, important win for LSU. And now A&M. I was thinking about this morning, Caroline, when we were talking about today, what time we were going to record and stuff. And I'm going, A&M and LSU have kind of had a very similar path this year.
Yeah.
Lose early to a team from the state of Florida in a game that you really, the entire offseason, felt like you could and needed to win. Nice recovery. Then played in a showdown game, an SEC West showdown game, and got beat. Now, the difference is LSU's nice recovery included wins over who's? Arkansas and Mississippi State. A&M's nice A&M's nice recovery was like, heck, I don't even remember who. It was ULM, and then it was Auburn and Arkansas. So actually a very similar path kind of to get back on your feet after that early season loss to Florida State and Miami. And then LSU, just a week prior, gets knocked off in heartbreaking fashion by Ole Miss, SEC West contender foe. A&M does the same, not quite as crazy, but a heartbreaking loss that we'll talk about here in a minute to, the juggernaut on the block in Alabama. LSU is 1 week ahead of A&M on these similar courses, right? So LSU had to go on the road and beat an SEC East team that's explosive offensively and has a lot of momentum and firepower. A&M is going to have to stay on LSU's trajectory, which is, it's weird that they've been that similar, has to go do almost the exact same thing. They have to go on the road. The difference is it's 100,000. It's Tennessee. I think it's a tougher test, although I do think the Missouri fans were very hungry, and man, that Mizzou offense certainly ran a scare through LSU. The interesting thing, we'll talk about it in a minute, LSU had to outscore Missouri, and they did. If A&M has to outscore Tennessee, I don't think they'll be able to. I do think this A&M defense is playing at a little different level than LSU's, whereas the LSU offense is playing at a different level than A&M. So that's the only place where the paths kind of diverge. But it's been a fascinating study to kind of see how each of these two teams, especially if A&M were to go get a win this weekend, and man, do they need it, Caroline.
It is crazy when you go back all the way to the beginning of the season, just how aligned these two teams are in Texas A&M and LSU in results, but not necessarily in process.
Yeah.
Because, how A&M lost that game, well, A&M's defense was playing lights out. And if you would have told me before that game, hey, A&M's going to stop the run, they're going to get to the quarterback, they're going to win the turnover battle, and they're going to have, a quarter of the number of penalties that Alabama had, I'd say, Texas A&M wins that game easily.
Yeah.
Because I think that the game plan, at least until now, for every team playing Alabama should have been and was, for the most part, take the run away from them and make Jalen Milroe beat you with his arms. For the most part, that I think is a pretty sound game plan, except for Jalen Milroe just happened to unlock something with his arm that we haven't seen from him yet. So Texas A&M, for the most part, has been able to win games through its defense, or at least stay in games defensively. LSU on the other side, is staying in games and is winning games because of its offense. Yeah. And it's being hurt because of its defense. And that's how the Ole Miss game played out. It was just whoever scored last won the football game.
Absolutely.
I think for Texas A&M, it was whoever was able to limit the pass game more between A&M and Alabama was going to win that game. And that was Alabama being able to stop Max Johnson more than Texas A&M was able to stop Jalen Milroe. I think the two differences here through, LSU's out of division game against Missouri versus A&M against Tennessee, you bring up the environment. The Neyland Stadium effect is absolutely real. The Memorial Stadium Faro Field effect, that's not a real thing. No disrespect to the Missouri fans out there, but not necessarily a menacing environment.
Caroline, what that is, that's a Big 12 environment. So you're not as familiar with that because I spent 16 years covering A&M in that league. That is a big, well, I don't know if I wasn't covering the team in 96, but I watched it for 16 years. I covered it for 14, 13.
Yeah.
That is not an SEC environment. That's a Big 12 environment. What A&M's going to is as SEC as it gets. You've been there many times. Why don't you tell the Aggie fans a little bit what A&M can expect? What are they walking into? I know a lot of fans have said, and I agree with them, thank God it's not a night game, but it's still at 2:30, coming off a bye week. Tennessee's got a ton to play for. It's going to be a perfect weather day in Knoxville, and I'm sure will be insane.
I think Neyland Stadium has the same effect that Texas A&M fans feel Kyle Field has.
Okay.
That LSU fans feel Tiger Stadium has. Yep. It is an incredibly loud and raucous environment. And Tennessee fans, man, Tennessee fans are passionate. Doesn't matter if you are coming off of a loss, if you're coming off of a win, whether it was the 2022 season where they had the #1 offense in the country, or if it was, the Butch Jones and Jeremy Pruitt years of oblivion. Tennessee fans are going to be incredibly passionate one way or another. Another aspect on Saturday that Tennessee does once a year is they're checkering Neyland Stadium. So each section has a color. So one color is orange, one section's white, and it makes a checkerboard. And for some reason, when they do that, the environment is elevated to another level. I was at the Tennessee-Florida game last year when they did it, and it's just it's an environment. I'm not going to say it's an unmatched environment because I do think it has the same kind of effect as Kyle Field or Tiger Stadium or Bryant-Denny at night. But that's kind of what you're looking there. It's going to be raucous and it's going to be incredibly loud. And Josh Heupel, this is season 3 from 2 years of a sample size we have, plays his best after a bye week. And unfortunately, LSU was on the receiving end of that last season.
Oh, wow. Don't tell me that. I didn't realize that was coming. It certainly doesn't bode well for A&M when you think about coming off that. It is one of those games that if you're looking at schedules as a media member, as a fan, anything you're trying to project and prognosticate, I think I would have circled the road trip to Tennessee as A&M's toughest, like most unlikely win of the season. Because I knew Bama's QB situation. Turns out we were all wrong, at least for that week. But you knew their QB situation. You knew they were kind of in a rebuild. It's still, I watched the game. We'll talk about this in a minute. It's still not Bama, which is an incredible amount of respect that Nick Saban's been able to do what he's been able to do since that Texas loss. But Tennessee at Tennessee, off of a bye, in Knoxville, A&M playing Bama the week before. That is the exact setup you don't want to see when the schedule comes out. And you'd love to have a flip-flop. Imagine if South Carolina was at Kyle Field this week, A&M's next game, and Tennessee was coming after the bye. I mean, that just feels so much better, and your odds of winning both of those games seem to feel so much better. And on top of that, Caroline, I think Tennessee's a tough matchup for the Aggies because of their style of play versus A&M's weakness. So A&M, may have to keep up scoring with an Aggie offense that I want to dive into that in a second, but the offense, hasn't put up a bunch of points lately in SEC play anyway. And then defensively, the Aggies' weakness is obviously in terms of the over-the-top passing game, if quarterbacks can get enough time. So not the best matchup, but look, it's the SEC in 2023. And A&M's proven they'll shut down the run. Tennessee's kind of been perfectly balanced, so they do lean on that running game to set things up. How does Joe Milton do if the Vols are living in 3rd and long? How does he handle that type of pressure, the pressure that he hasn't seen probably all season? Those are wild cards in terms of the Vol offense and how accurate can he be in the face of pressure. So I do think this will be a really fascinating competitive football game. But this Aggie offense is really interesting because I know downstairs, Nuño, Olin, and I have been talking, and there's frustration in the fan base about the offense. And I'm going, I get it. I see it. And I've seen 3 bad halves in the last 3 weeks. They had 6 points against Auburn with Wigman at the helm, and then Max came in, and they go 21 in the second half. I see the second half against Arkansas, where they really don't do much. I think the offense produced 3. And I see the second half against Bama, where they did next to nothing. But you also, in all 3 of those games, have seen them move the ball in those bad halves. They've stalled in the red zone. They've shot themselves in the foot with turnovers. But, man, Caroline, I'm looking at what the Auburn defense did to Georgia. I'm looking at what the Bama defense did to Ole Miss. I'm looking at what the Bama defense did for 3 quarters against, Quinn Ewers and Worthy and Jatavian Sanders in Texas. I think Texas had 13 points going in the fourth quarter. Now they exploded in the fourth. But I think people are kind of going, you're focusing on these really bad halves, but you're also not going, man, when they're firing, they're actually really impressive against a couple of damn good defenses. And Arkansas I wouldn't describe as that, but they lit them up for 17 and about 250 yards in the first half. So when they're good, they're really good. When they're not, they're not. One day you think that 4 quarters is going to come together. It may need to be Saturday.
And if there are Aggie fans out there that haven't paid attention to Tennessee football this season, I'm here to tell you that this Tennessee Volunteers offense is not what it was last season. That Joe Milton is not Hendon Hooker. That Tennessee is not airing the ball out 75-yard bombs for a touchdown, on seemingly every single possession. This is a Tennessee team that can score. This offense is created to put up points. It's just not as explosive as it was maybe last year when Tennessee was the top offense in the country and they were the number one team in the country at one point. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, and I think the biggest reason, is Joe Milton. That Joe Milton simply is not Hendon Hooker. That Hendon Hooker had the ability to extend drives with his legs, and he could throw off platforms. He could pick up a first down if he needed him to. Joe Milton isn't really like that. Joe Milton isn't the most mobile quarterback. He still has yet to throw a touchdown pass off platform in his entire career. He's been in college football for 5 years.
Yeah.
He struggles to throw on the run. Hendon Hooker did that so well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is I really truly don't know how much this coaching staff trusts Joe Milton to not throw interceptions and to not overthrow receivers. Because a majority of the Tennessee offense this season, now not all, because they still throw the deep ball and Joe Milton can throw the heck out of the football. But a majority of their offense has been predicated on dinking and dunking, short screens, 4, 5, 6 yard, check downs here and there, and running the football. And I think that Tennessee probably has the most stacked running back room because they've got 3 certified running back threats in Jalen Wright, Jabari Small, and Dylan Sampson. So I think that that's going to be more of the Tennessee identity this year, whereas last year it was just Hendon Hooker drops back and is going to hit either Cedric Tillman or Jalen Hyatt somewhere. This season is a little bit different. I don't think that Tennessee has seen a defensive front like Texas A&M. Heck, I don't think there's many teams that have seen a defensive front like Texas A&M. So I think if they can continue to get pressure on Joe Milton and they can stop the run, well, Joe Milton's not, his bread and butter is not escaping that pressure and still being able to continue to make plays. So this is an easier offense to stop than maybe what a lot of people are familiar with the Tennessee offense being, but it still has the ability to put up some points. The Tennessee defense, however, I can't quite put my finger on what it is because on one hand, they're giving up a bunch of points to Florida. They can't make a tackle. And then on the other hand, they really limit for the most part what Spencer Rattler did a couple of weeks ago when they played South Carolina at home. So the defense is kind of hit or miss, but this offense, it's a beatable offense. I mean, Florida, we saw on full display, Florida gave up 300 yards to Kentucky, and Florida was able to take down Tennessee and stuff the run game for a majority of it.
Well, I think the running game is the big thing. And you talk about Florida's stuff in the run game, and that is the game where Tennessee looks so bad. And against, they haven't played anyone, I don't think, above a 2 on a 10-point scale, except Florida and South Carolina. And South Carolina's they're a respectable SEC team, but they're not any sort of contender. I do think A&M is a lot more tested. I think Tennessee has faced 2 tests, and they're 1-1, and they looked a lot better in the one at home than on the road. So, but those are not really good teams. I think A&M will be. I believe they'll absolutely be the best team Tennessee's played to date. I think Tennessee might be I don't know what happened with Miami at Georgia Tech. We all know what happened at the end, but
take a freaking knee.
Is Tennessee the third best A&M's played? Are they second? Or what happens if Tennessee and Arkansas play neutral? I think Tennessee would win, but KJ Jefferson certainly, on a given night, I know Milton can go off, but I think you'd say who's the better quarterback? Everyone would say it's KJ Jefferson. So there's a lot. A&M has faced a couple quarterbacks better. They've probably faced at least 2 teams, one better, one as good. I think you touched on the biggest matchup of this football game, and it's, can Tennessee run the ball against A&M? A&M gave up 208 a game last year on the ground. So far this year, with playing 3 SEC West teams and Miami, they're giving up 84. Alabama just rushed. So your LSU Tigers held Alabama to 6 rushing yards in 2021, a game that, oddly enough, Bama won. And in 2007, Nick Saban's first year, they had held Alabama to 20 yards. Those are the only 2 games since 2007 that Alabama's rushed for less yards under Nick Saban than they did Saturday. So this is
crazy.
It's wild. And that's a game A&M lost. I think we've talked this Tennessee thing through. Give me your prediction on it, and I'm going to save mine for later in the week. Give me your prediction, and then let's talk real quickly about, I just want to hear your take on what you saw against Bama, and what does that mean for Jimbo and Aggie football right now? Like, forget about big picture. What does it mean right now to lose that game the way they did? So hit me with a quick prediction, and then I want to go on to LSU.
I think Texas A&M wins this game. I think that Texas A&M, the defensive front is just too good for Tennessee to run the football on them. And I don't think that where Joe Milton is right now and where this offense is, I don't think that Joe Milton can win you a game simply with his arm. Joe Milton, before this season, really took care of the football pretty well. He's now thrown 3 interceptions on the season. And like you mentioned, that's really only against 2 SEC opponents. And neither of those SEC opponents, I don't think any of us really think are going to be contenders this year in Florida and South Carolina. So Joe Milton cannot take care of the football. I think that's something that the Aggie defense can do is, one, take advantage of certain opportunities that Joe Milton might give to you, and to completely stop the run. You're going to have to put up points. This is going to be a game where Max Johnson has to take some risks, and he's going to have to be willing to take those risks. But I think that I look at the pass catchers, Texas A&M has the advantage. The quarterback, I think that Texas A&M has the advantage. The defensive front, I think Texas A&M has the advantage. Run game, I do think Tennessee has the advantage, but I think that that's something that Texas A&M can take care of. I think there's an element of, because, you could talk about, well, you're coming off of a bye versus coming off of Bama. On one side, you're refreshed. You've had 2 weeks to prepare. On the other side, you're dejected. You're sad after a tough loss. You might be a little bit banged up, but I think that Aggie team is going to be much more motivated after that Bama loss, that they felt victory against a good Alabama team, and then they snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory. I think they're going to be extra motivated going into an incredibly raucous environment in Neyland. I think it'll be close. I think it'll be the difference of a score, either 3 points or a touchdown. I like Texas A&M in this one. But back to your point about the Alabama loss, about what that means for Texas A&M. I think that it's kind of a benchmark for where the SEC West is as a whole. Good look at Bama, A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, that those are all good, maybe even great teams that aren't necessarily elite teams. And I think it just shows the margin of error and how thin it is in the SEC West. That, let's say, hey, if Jimbo decides to go for it on 4th and 1 instead of punting it when you're in Alabama territory, how different could that game have been? Could A&M could have scored on that possession? You know what I didn't understand? That's a win right there. So I think that the margin is very thin. And if I'm A&M, I wouldn't be overly, hanging on to that loss like it was a season-ending loss, because I think you can learn a lot from it. I don't know exactly what Cole Kubelik said, but our man, he one of our favorites, obviously here and for you. He's the best. And he said something like he didn't feel like A&M really ever had a chance in that second half. And if you want to say Bama dominated the second half and controlled it, hell yeah. But not have a chance. I watched, Anaya Smith get overthrown on a walk-in touchdown to tie the game in the fourth quarter. I watched that game be tied, I think, going late third quarter, early fourth. I watched, Anaya's foot step out of bounds where the Aggies were going to be able to kick off. And, with about 3 minutes left, down 2. In the game with 3 timeouts. Also saw A&M waste like 30 seconds off the clock, took a timeout just to kick a field goal. I thought that was precious real estate that just kind of got wasted toward the end of the game when the game was still very much so in Texas A&M's grip. And credit Bama, they that stepping out of bounds by that much, you felt like, man, that could hurt, but it probably won't because it was on the 1.5 yard line. But a holding penalty, a sack, like it was a disaster there in those final, and it cost you not only a timeout, but a lot of seconds to where you had to onside it. But that game was, I don't know. I mean, I thought it was insanely competitive. But Bama, absolutely, they won the game by outplaying A&M in really the whole second half, but especially down the stretch in those key moments. Whereas LSU did the opposite in to a lesser team, but up there in Missouri when they had to.
like I said, they did what A&M had to do. It was like LSU. They've recovered from the Florida State loss. Oh, let's write them off. Mm-hmm. They lost at Ole Miss. They're done. They're going to quit. They had higher aspirations. It's kind of what people are thinking of A&M now as they go to Knoxville. LSU answered the bell. How impressed were you by their ability to respond? I thought that was a dangerous trap game. And Jaden Daniels he's been incredible this year. I think he should be, without question, a top 3 Heisman contender at this point.
I think there's a very strong argument for Jaden Daniels to be the best quarterback in the country. I mean, his passing stats are up there with Caleb Williams and Michael Penix Jr. He's thrown 19 touchdown passes and only 2 interceptions. But what he can do on the ground is unlike any other quarterback in all of college football. And by the way, he did a lot of that when he had bruised ribs against Missouri. I mean, he continued to go out there. He continued to make plays, even when it was very obvious that he was in a whole heck of a lot of pain. I was so impressed with his toughness and his ability to really carry the team. He's been doing that all season, and I think that was on full display against Missouri. But at one point in the game, I mean, LSU was down 15. Yeah, Missouri led 22-7 early in the first half, and I'm thinking to myself, this season is over. I mean, it did feel like they were dejected. It did feel like they gave up. But then they continued to make plays. The defense, for the first time in a long time, stepped up and made the plays that they needed to make. The LSU defense is still absolutely atrocious, but they got 2 very timely sacks. Yep. They got 2 interceptions that turned into 10 points, a field goal from Harold Perkins, interception, and then Major Burns late in the game to kind of seal the deal with a pick 6. So the defense made stops when they needed to, and the offense just continues to make life a living hell for their opposing defenses. And they just did what they needed to do to get a win. It was ugly. It was not without a little bit of stress and anxiety and a whole lot of sweat, but that was a top 25 team, an undefeated team on the road that was playing for everything. That was playing for a big marquee, solidify ourselves as an actual contender in this league kind of win, and LSU was able to get it done. Yeah,
they were. And this week they're on the road at home.
At home.
Might be talking a different conversation, at least if they were on the road at Jordan-Hare, but they're not. They're playing Auburn at home. Are you like me? I would be very surprised if this wasn't a complete and total LSU blowout. Maybe one. I just think this plays into LSU's hands. You have a bad defense. You're really bad in the secondary. Well, guess who's not equipped to take advantage of that? I think this one could be pretty one-sided, and this could be a rough Saturday for Hugh Freeze and the Tigers.
LSU's secondary is awful. Auburn's pass game might be even worse, which is saying something.
They were under 100 against A&M.
Under 60. It was.
Oh, that was 57. Was that the 57? 57?
I think that was the 57 game.
I get confused with them in Arkansas. You're right.
Yeah, under 60. So that at least gives me confidence. Which I don't love is the fact that this LSU Auburn game is always weird. In this matchup, throw out who the better team is. Throw out whether it's at Tiger Stadium or Jordan-Hare. I go back to 2019, the best team in the history of LSU football, maybe in the history of college football. That came down to a walk-off field goal for LSU to win it. I mean, the history of this matchup is always strange, is always bizarre. So I have to keep that into consideration. But this feels like the perfect opportunity for LSU to blow an SEC opponent out. And I think they really need that. Yeah, they got to win against Missouri on the road, but they still gave up almost 600 yards and almost 40 points in the process. I think this LSU team just needs a little bit of a confidence boost. And then you got Army, and then you got the bye, and then you got Alabama. So the next few weeks at least look favorable for LSU.
Well, Let's close it out, Caroline, with our real quick. I think we're kind of in lockstep this week with our SEC Player of the Year candidates. And there's I don't know how else to say this. It's kind of a weak SEC slate. Arkansas goes to Bama. I think that's 5 L's in a row for the Razorbacks. I just don't see how they can win. I could see where they, could maybe, I don't know. I don't know how many points they score against that Bama defense. And that one's not on my radar. Arkansas at Ole Miss was on my radar. It was a very good game up there in Oxford. This one's not. Kentucky, Missouri, and South Carolina, Florida. It almost feels like SEC East elimination Saturday, does it not? Like those two losers we can stop talking about them as playing any kind of role in the race. And then, if A&M Tennessee, I think we've both called it kind of a toss-up. We both slightly favor the Aggies. But if A&M were to pull that off, the big winner on Saturday could end up being Georgia. Now, you could see Tennessee fall off. You could see the loser of Florida, South Carolina, and the loser of Kentucky, Missouri kind of go away for good. So, yeah, I mean, I think Georgia, and it really depends on A&M. If A&M beats Tennessee, I think Georgia's the big winner this weekend because I think this SEC East is about to kind of fall off a cliff a little bit after Saturday.
It did kind of feel like this past week in the SEC East was almost like a balancing week for the SEC East. Of Georgia could assert their dominance against a team that they should have asserted their dominance against. Kentucky loses to Georgia. They kind of, that 5-0 hope for the SEC East has kind of, sputtered a bit. Missouri loses to LSU. So I think in the East, we're starting to shape up at least a power ranking. And that's why I think Missouri-Kentucky is actually really intriguing, because that game could be for second place in the East. The winner of that game has a massive leg up. And of course, they'll have to take on Tennessee. But I think that winner has a massive leg up. And then Florida, South Carolina, I think, is playing for let's just not be the second worst team in the SEC East above Vanderbilt.
True.
I like South Carolina in that one, but I think that it's clear that A&M Tennessee is going to be the most interesting game. Arkansas, Alabama is intriguing for me just because Arkansas's made things very difficult for Ole Miss, LSU, not for A&M, but I think they could make things a little bit interesting for Alabama, but I still think Alabama gets the win.
Yeah, maybe a letdown game for the Tide. All right,
due to time constraints, we had to cut it off there with Billy and Caroline, but thank you so much for watching Up to the Second College Football presented by our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors. We'll see you next week.